I adjusted my tie one more time, checking my reflection in the car mirror. Today was Enzo's high school graduation. My son was finally 18, and I'd been counting down the days for months. I grabbed the wrapped gift from the passenger seat, a vintage watch that belonged to my father. Something meaningful for this milestone. The parking lot buzzed with families in their Sunday best. Parents hugged their graduates, cameras flashed everywhere, and laughter filled the air. My heart swelled with pride as I walked toward the crowd, scanning for Enzo's familiar face. Then I saw him, tall, handsome, wearing his cap and gown with that crooked smile I remembered from when he was little. I called out his name and waved, my face breaking into a huge grin. But when our eyes met, his expression changed completely. He walked over, but something was wrong. His posture was stiff, his eyes cold. Other families were watching now, and my stomach started to twist. "Enzo, congratulations. I'm so proud of." "You weren't invited," he cut me off, his voice flat and emotionless. "Please leave." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, conversation stopped. Parents stared. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stood there frozen, the gift box trembling in my hands. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not like this. "What do you mean I wasn't invited?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Enzo, I'm your father." His jaw tightened. "You were never there for me," he said loudly enough for nearby families to hear. Why start now? The accusation pierced through me. Never there? I'd coached his little league team. I'd helped with homework every weekend I had him. I'd driven 3 hours each way just to watch his soccer games until the visits stopped. "That's not true," I managed to say. "You know that's not true." But Enzo was already turning away. In the distance, I caught sight of Carol, my ex-wife, standing with her mother Joan. They weren't looking surprised or concerned. They were smirking. Joan whispered something to Carol, and they both laughed. My blood ran cold. This wasn't spontaneous anger from Enzo. This was planned. "Please don't do this," I called after my son, but he kept walking toward his mother and grandmother. I stood alone in the middle of celebrating families, clutching a gift that would never be opened, watching my only child disappear into the crowd. I stumbled back to my car, my legs feeling like they might give out. Once inside, I gripped the steering wheel and let the tears come. 18 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion had just been erased in front of dozens of strangers. The memories flooded back. Enzo at 6, crying when I dropped him off after our weekend together. "Why can't you live with us anymore, Daddy?" he'd asked. Enzo at 10, begging me to come to his school play, even though Carol said it would confuse him. Enzo at 14, the last time we'd spoken before everything went silent. I'd been a good father, maybe not perfect, but I'd tried. I'd sacrificed my own social life to spend every free moment with him during our court-ordered visits. I'd never missed a child support payment, never spoken badly about his mother, never tried to turn him against anyone. So how did we get here? How did my son look at me with such hatred? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to his number. Still blocked. It had been blocked for 3 years, ever since he turned 15. Carol said he didn't want contact anymore, that he was old enough to decide. But something about today felt different. The way Carol and Joan had looked at me, like they'd won some kind of game I didn't even know we were playing. That evening, I called my old friend Marcus. He'd stayed close with some of our mutual friends from when Carol and I were married, people who'd watched Enzo grow up. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest," I said, after explaining what happened at graduation. He was quiet for a long moment. "Sawyer, there's stuff you should probably know, stuff I should have told you years ago." My heart started pounding. "What kind of stuff?" "About Carol and her mother. About what they've been telling Enzo." He sighed heavily. "They've been rewriting history, man, for years." "What do you mean, rewriting history?" "They told him you abandoned the family, that you walked out and never looked back, that you only saw him because the court forced you to." Marcus's voice was heavy with guilt. "Joan's been the one pushing it. She never forgave you for the divorce." I felt sick. But that's not what happened. Carol asked for the divorce. I fought for joint custody. "I know that. You know that. But Enzo doesn't know that." Marcus paused. "Joan made sure of it." "They told Enzo you walked out," he continued. "But that's not what happened, is it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. No, that wasn't what happened at all. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying Marcus's words, trying to piece together how my relationship with Enzo had been systematically destroyed. Around 3 a.m., I found myself in the garage, going through old boxes I'd avoided for years. In a dusty shoebox behind Christmas decorations, I found something that made my hands shake. A letter, written in Enzo's 12-year-old handwriting, addressed to me but never sent. "Dear Dad," it began, "I miss you so much. I wish you could come to my baseball games. Mom says you're too busy, but I know you'd come if you could. I love you even when you can't visit." Tears blurred my vision as I kept reading. "I wrote you another letter last week, but Grandma Joan said Mom tore it up because it was too sad. Did you ever get it? I hope you know I think about you every day. Love, your son Enzo." The letter was dated 6 years ago. 6 years of thinking my son had grown distant, naturally, when really someone had been intercepting his attempts to reach out to me. At the bottom, in faded pencil, was a postscript that broke my heart. "P.S. Grandma said Mom tore up my last letter to you. Did you ever get it?" I held the letter against my chest and cried. My little boy had been trying to reach me, and I never knew. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I had more important things to do. I spent the day gathering every document from the divorce, every court filing, every piece of evidence from our custody battle. By afternoon, I was sitting across from attorney Sandra Hayes, a family law specialist who'd been recommended by a colleague. "Can you still file for parental alienation after this long?" I asked, sliding the shoebox of documents across her desk. Sandra reviewed everything carefully, the letter, the custody agreements, my visitation records. "This is textbook parental alienation," she said finally. "The question is whether it's too late to file." "What do you mean?" "Your son is 18 now, legally an adult, but," she paused, studying the hidden letter, "we might have grounds for a civil case against the parties who interfered with your relationship, especially if we can prove deliberate alienation by the grandmother." She looked up at me seriously. "Is it too late to file for grandparent interference or parental alienation?" The question felt like a lifeline. Maybe I couldn't get those lost years back, but I could get the truth out. I could clear my name and maybe, just maybe, help Enzo understand what really happened. "Let's find out," I said. 2 weeks later, I was buying groceries when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, if it isn't the deadbeat dad himself. I turned to see Joan pushing a cart, her lips twisted in that smug smile I remembered from court proceedings. She looked older, but just as mean. "Hello, Joan," I said calmly, not taking her bait. "I heard you made quite the scene at Enzo's graduation," she said, examining her fingernails. "How embarrassing for everyone involved." "Embarrassing for who?" She laughed coldly. "For you, obviously. Did you really think you could just show up after years of neglect and play the caring father? I never neglected him. Please. Enzo's told me all about your empty promises, how you'd cancel visits, forget birthdays." She leaned on her cart. "He's better off without you. Always has been." Joan grabbed a box of tea from the shelf. "By the way, Enzo got accepted to State University. Full scholarship. Too bad you won't be involved in that either." She started to push her cart away, but I called after her. "Joan?" She turned back, eyebrow raised. I smiled calmly. "Enjoy this while it lasts." Over the next month, I began what I called my truth-seeking mission. I contacted everyone who'd known our family during Enzo's childhood. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, other parents. Mrs. Patterson, Enzo's third-grade teacher, met me at a coffee shop downtown. She remembered me well. "You were one of the most involved divorced dads I'd ever seen," she said without hesitation. "Always at parent conferences, volunteer reading days, field trips. When you stopped coming, I asked Enzo about it." "What did he say?" "He said you got too busy with work and didn't have time for him anymore. But I always thought that was strange because you'd seemed so devoted." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Then again, that's what happens in bitter divorces sometimes." Coach Rodriguez from Enzo's soccer team told a similar story. "You never missed a game until you just stopped coming. Enzo said you moved away for work. But I never moved away. I lived 20 minutes from their house the entire time. The most revealing conversation was with Mrs. Chen, our old neighbor. She handed me a manila folder. "I thought you might want this someday." Inside was a copy of an essay Enzo had written for school when he was 13. The title read, The person I admire most. My dad, it began, is the strongest person I know. The essay described me as Enzo's hero, mentioning specific memories I treasured, building a treehouse together, teaching him to ride a bike, staying up all night when he had the flu during one of our weekends. But it was dated just 2 years before he'd cut off all contact. How could he write about admiring me one day, then claim I was never there for him the next? Armed with new determination, I decided to take a risk. I drove to State University, where Enzo had started his freshman year. I didn't plan to contact him directly. I just wanted to see where he was living, maybe get a sense of how he was doing. I parked across from his dormitory and called my friend Jake, who worked in the university's financial aid office. "Jake, I need a favor. Can you tell me anything about my son's tuition situation?" "Enzo Rivers." There was typing in the background. "Let me see. Rivers Enzo. Interesting. His tuition is being paid in full by a private benefactor. No loans, no family contribution listed." "Who's the benefactor?" "Says here, Joan Martinez. Is that his grandmother?" My blood went cold. So he thinks it's his mother paying, but it's actually his grandmother's money? Looks that way. The payments come from an account in Joan's name only. Joan was still pulling the strings, still controlling Enzo's life from behind the scenes. That night, I made copies of the old essay and the childhood letter. Without any note or signature, I mailed them to Enzo's dorm room. I didn't expect a response, but 3 days later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mom, did you ever tell Dad about my letters when I was little?" The text wasn't meant for me. Enzo had accidentally sent it to my number instead of Carol's. But seeing it felt like a crack in the wall that had been built between us. 10 minutes later, another text came through. "Sorry, wrong number." But it was too late. I'd seen enough to know that my package had reached him, and it was making him ask questions. I stared at my phone for an hour, wanting desperately to respond, to tell him I never got those letters, that I would have cherished every single one. But I forced myself to wait. If this was going to work, it had to come from him. The next day, I heard through Marcus that Carol had gotten an angry call from Enzo, demanding to know about letters from his childhood. The wall was starting to crack. According to Marcus, who heard it from Carol's sister, the conversation between Carol and Joan had been explosive. "Did you throw away Enzo's letters to his father back then?" Carol had demanded. Joan's response was typical. "I did what was best for that boy. You were too weak to cut Sawyer off properly." But Enzo had been home during this argument. He'd heard every word. The next part made my heart race. Enzo had apparently cornered his mother afterward, asking the question that changed everything. "Did Dad leave us, or did you push him away?" Carol, caught between her son's direct question and years of supporting her mother's lies, had broken down crying. She'd admitted that the divorce had been complicated, and that Grandma Joan had strong opinions about your father. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough to plant serious doubt in Enzo's mind about the story he'd been told for years. Marcus said Enzo had gone to his room and stayed there for hours, not coming out for dinner. When Joan tried to bring him food, he'd refused to open the door. "Mom," he'd called through the door, "I need some time to think." That night, I got a text from the same unknown number. "Can we talk?" We met at a neutral coffee shop near campus. I arrived early and sat in a corner booth, my hands shaking as I waited. When Enzo walked in, he looked older than 18, tired and confused. He sat across from me without making eye contact. For a full minute, neither of us spoke. "I got your package," he said finally. "I thought you might want to see those." He looked up at me for the first time. "Did you really never get my letters?" "Never. If I had, I would have responded to every single one." Enzo's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandma Joan said you didn't care about me anymore, that you were relieved when I stopped asking to see you." "That's not true. When you stopped wanting visits, it broke my heart, but I thought it was what you wanted." We talked for 2 hours. I told him about the divorce from my perspective, about how I'd fought for more custody time, about the nights I'd cried wondering what I'd done wrong. Near the end, Enzo asked the question that cut deepest. "Why didn't you ever fight harder? Why didn't you try to contact me when I got older?" I took a deep breath. Because you were a child, I didn't want to drag you through a legal battle or force you to choose sides. I thought if I loved you enough to let you go, maybe someday you'd come back on your own. A month later, everything changed again. My parents, who had been battling cancer together, passed away within days of each other. The funeral was small but meaningful. Reading their will afterward, I discovered something that would shake up Carol and Joan's world completely. My parents had left a considerable estate, nearly $200,000, to Enzo. But there was a condition that made my lawyer smile. The inheritance could only be accessed if Enzo had a functional and ongoing relationship with his father, Sawyer Rivers. My parents had seen through the alienation, even when I hadn't fully understood it myself. They'd protected their grandson's inheritance while ensuring that the truth would eventually come out. When the estate lawyer contacted Enzo about the inheritance, Carol immediately called me, furious. "This is emotional blackmail," she screamed through the phone. "No," I said calmly. "This is my parents protecting their grandson from lies." But Carol wasn't done fighting. Within a week, she'd filed legal papers objecting to the will's conditions. And Joan, true to form, had hired her own lawyer to challenge the inheritance entirely. They were going to make this ugly. But for the first time in years, I was ready for a fight. Sandra Hayes reviewed the objection paperwork and smiled grimly. "They just gave us the opening we needed." "What do you mean?" "By challenging the will, they're going to have to testify under oath about your relationship with Enzo. That means we can subpoena records, call witnesses, and force them to explain the alienation in court." She leaned forward. "I'm filing a defamation and custodial interference suit against Joan Martinez. Not for money, for the truth." The papers were served a week later. Joan's reaction, according to Carol's sister, was volcanic. She'd screamed that I was a vindictive man trying to destroy their family. During the first mediation session, I sat across from Joan and spoke directly to her for the first time in years. "You've lied long enough," I said calmly. "It's time for the truth to come out." Joan's lawyer tried to object, but the mediator let me continue. "For 6 years, you've poisoned my son against me. You've intercepted his letters, fed him lies about my feelings toward him, and stolen precious time I can never get back." Joan's face was red with rage, but she couldn't deny the evidence we'd compiled. The hidden letter, the intercepted communications, the testimonies from teachers and neighbors. It was all adding up to a clear pattern of deliberate alienation. While the legal battle raged, Enzo was doing his own investigation. He'd started keeping a journal, trying to sort through his memories and figure out what was real. One entry, which he showed me months later, read, "I remember being scared to talk about Dad when Grandma Joan was around. She would get this look in her eyes like I was betraying the family. I started pretending I didn't miss him." Another entry was even more revealing. "Found my old diary from middle school. I wrote, 'I wish I could talk to Dad without Mom getting angry,' at least 10 times. Why was I so afraid?" Enzo had started questioning everything. He'd called old friends whose parents knew me, asking about their memories of my involvement in his life. Every conversation confirmed the same thing. I'd been a present, loving father until I'd suddenly disappeared from his world. The journal helped him realize that his memories of abandonment didn't match other people's memories of our relationship. The cognitive dissonance was forcing him to confront the possibility that everything he'd believed about me was wrong. When he finally called to tell me about the journal, his voice was shaky. "Dad, I think they lied to me about everything." While building our case, Sandra suggested hiring a private investigator to look into Joan's background. What we discovered was shocking. Joan Martinez had been arrested in 1987 for financial exploitation of an elderly neighbor. The charges were eventually dropped, but the police report detailed a pattern of manipulation and psychological abuse designed to gain control of the victim's assets. "She's done this before," Sandra explained. "This is how she operates. She identifies vulnerable relationships and systematically destroys them for her own benefit." The sealed record was legally obtained and, through proper channels, shared with Enzo. When he read about his grandmother's past, everything clicked into place. "She did to you what she did to that old man," he said when he called me. She saw our relationship as a threat to her control over our family. The revelation about Joan's history gave Enzo the final piece of the puzzle. He began to see that his grandmother wasn't just protective, she was predatory. That weekend, he called Joan and confronted her directly about the police report. Her response was telling. Instead of denying it or explaining, she hung up on him. For the first time in years, Enzo was seeing his grandmother's true nature. The legal pressure was mounting on Joan from multiple directions. Our lawsuit was moving forward, but I had another strategy in mind. Through proper legal channels, information about Joan's financial control over Enzo's education was shared with the university's administration. Questions were raised about undue influence and whether Enzo's enrollment documents contained false information about family financial status. The university's financial aid office launched an internal review. They discovered that Enzo's aid application had listed Carol as his sole financial support, when in reality, Joan was paying all expenses from undisclosed accounts. "Your scholarship status is under review," the financial aid officer told Enzo. "We need documentation proving you have financial independence from external influencers." The message was clear. If Joan was controlling his finances, Enzo needed to take control of his own college funding to maintain his enrollment. For the first time, Enzo was forced to confront how completely his grandmother controlled his life. She paid his tuition, his housing, his meal plan, everything. He couldn't make a single decision without her approval. That night, he called me in tears. "Dad, I'm not even a real adult. I'm just Grandma Joan's puppet." The confrontation between Joan and Enzo was inevitable. According to Enzo, it happened in Joan's living room, where family photos covered every surface, photos that notably excluded me entirely. "You're letting that man poison you against your family." Joan had screamed. But Enzo, now armed with the truth about his grandmother's past and her systematic lies, stood his ground. "No," he'd said firmly, "I'm finally seeing clearly." Joan had tried every manipulation tactic in her arsenal: guilt, anger, threats to cut off financial support, but Enzo had spent weeks preparing for this moment. "You kept his letters from me," he'd said. "You told me he didn't love me when he was fighting to see me. You destroyed my relationship with my own father." Joan's response was telling. "I protected you from him." "No," Enzo had replied. "You protected yourself from losing control." The conversation ended with Enzo packing his belongings and leaving Joan's house. He moved into a small apartment near campus, determined to support himself without her money. When he called to tell me about his decision, I could hear the fear in his voice, but I could also hear something else: freedom. That evening, I sat down and wrote Enzo a letter, not an angry rant about the years we'd lost, but an honest explanation of my love for him and my understanding of how he'd been manipulated. "I want you to know that I never blamed you for believing what you were told," I wrote. "You were a child who trusted the adults in your life. That's what children are supposed to do." I explained my decision to step back when he'd asked for space, and how I'd respected his apparent wishes even though it destroyed me inside. "I thought loving you meant letting you go if that's what you wanted. I was wrong. I should have fought harder for the truth." I ended the letter with a promise. "I'll never lie to you, even when the truth is painful. You deserve honesty from the people who love you." I left the letter on his apartment doorstep with no fanfare. 3 hours later, he showed up at my house. When I opened the door, he was crying. Without saying a word, he stepped forward and hugged me for the first time in 10 years. We stood there in my doorway, holding each other and crying for all the lost time. 6 months later, Enzo graduated from his first year of college with honors. This time, when graduation day came, things were very different. Enzo had been selected to give a speech representing the honor students. As I sat in the auditorium, I saw Carol and Joan in the back row, looking uncomfortable and out of place. When Enzo took the podium, he looked confident and mature in a way that reminded me of the little boy who used to practice speeches in my living room. "I want to thank the people who've supported my education," he began. "But more importantly, I want to thank my real role models, the people who taught me that truth and integrity matter more than comfort." He paused and looked directly at me. "My father taught me that love sometimes means making hard choices, and that real strength comes from doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Joan and Carol sat in complete silence as Enzo continued. I almost lost the most important relationship in my life because people I trusted lied to me. But I learned that it's never too late to choose truth over comfort. At the end of his speech, he said something that made my heart soar. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who love you enough to tell you the truth, even when it hurts. The aftermath of Enzo's public speech was swift. Carol, who had been caught between her mother's manipulation and her own guilt for years, finally found the courage to break free. She called me the day after graduation. "Sawyer, we need to talk." We met at the same coffee shop where Enzo and I had reconciled. Carol looked older, tired, but also relieved. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I let my mother poison our son against you, and I knew it was wrong." She explained how Joan had gradually taken control of every aspect of their lives after the divorce, using financial support as leverage to enforce her will. "She convinced me that you would try to take Enzo away from me if we didn't present a united front," Carol admitted. "I was scared and stupid, and I let her manipulate both of us." Carol had filed a restraining order against Joan, finally cutting ties with her mother's toxic influence. Enzo had moved in with me temporarily while he figured out his next steps. For the first time since our divorce, Carol and I were able to have an honest conversation about our son's well-being without Joan's interference. "He's happier than I've seen him in years," Carol said. "You're good for him." The legal case concluded with a complete vindication. The judge ruled that Joan Martinez had engaged in deliberate parental alienation and custodial interference over a period of 6 years. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of systematic manipulation designed to damage the relationship between a father and his minor child, the judge stated in her ruling. A public statement of record was filed, officially documenting the alienation and clearing my name of any abandonment or neglect. Joan, who had remained defiant throughout the proceedings, scoffed at the ruling. "You still lost years with him," she said as we left the courthouse. I looked at her calmly and smiled. "But I'm getting the rest." The financial aspect was resolved as well. Enzo would receive his inheritance from my parents, and he'd been accepted for legitimate financial aid at the university based on his own merit. Joan's era of control was officially over. She'd lost her influence over Carol, her relationship with Enzo, and her ability to manipulate our family. As we walked out of the courthouse together, Enzo squeezed my arm. "Is it really over?" "The legal part is," I said. "Now we focus on moving forward." A year later, Joan's world had completely collapsed. Without Carol's and Enzo's dependence, she'd become financially unstable and socially isolated. She called Enzo one evening, crying and begging for help with her mortgage payment. The woman who had once wielded money as a weapon was now desperate for financial assistance. Enzo, who had grown into a confident young man with clear boundaries, listened to her plea and then called me. "What should I do?" he asked. I thought about all the pain Joan had caused, all the years she'd stolen from us, all the lies she'd told. A part of me wanted to tell Enzo to hang up on her, but I also thought about the man I wanted to be and the example I wanted to set for my son. "That's your decision," I said. "But remember that kindness should be earned through changed behavior, not just desperation." Enzo thought for a moment. "She's never apologized. She's never admitted she was wrong. She's only calling because she needs something." Then you have your answer. When Joan called back, Enzo's response was firm but not cruel. "I can't help you until you're willing to acknowledge the harm you caused and make real amends." Joan hung up. She never called again. Enzo and I spent the next 2 years rebuilding our relationship slowly and carefully. We took fishing trips, visited his campus regularly, and had long, honest conversations about everything we'd missed. He told me about the confusion he'd felt as a child, the pressure to reject me, and the fear that loving me meant betraying his mother and grandmother. I told him about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering what I'd done wrong, and the constant battle between respecting his apparent wishes and fighting for our relationship. "I'm sorry about graduation day," he said during one of our talks. I was so angry and confused. I believed their story completely. "You were protecting yourself," I replied. You did what you thought was right with the information you had. We established new traditions, weekly phone calls, monthly visits, and an annual father-son trip to places we'd always wanted to see together. Enzo thrived in college, making friends, excelling academically, and growing into the kind of man I'd always hoped he'd become. But more importantly, he was happy. The constant tension and manipulation that had defined his childhood was gone. "I feel like I can breathe now," he told me. "I don't have to choose sides anymore." 2 years after that devastating graduation day, Enzo graduated from college with highest honors. This time, when I arrived at the ceremony, everything was different. I parked in the front row of the family section. Enzo had saved me a seat in the very front, right where I could see everything clearly. Carol was there too, and we sat together peacefully, both proud of our son's achievements. When they called Enzo's name, he walked across the stage with confidence and joy. As he accepted his diploma, he looked directly at me and smiled, the same crooked smile from his childhood, but now filled with genuine happiness instead of hidden pain. After the ceremony, families gathered for photos and celebrations. Enzo ran over and hugged me tightly, lifting me off the ground despite being barely taller than me. "We did it, Dad," he said. "We actually did it." As we posed for pictures, I caught sight of Joan standing alone near the parking lot, watching from a distance. She looked older, smaller, defeated. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her. But then Enzo laughed at something Carol said, and my attention returned to my family, my real family, built on truth and love instead of manipulation and control. I walked away from that graduation with my son's arm around my shoulder, whole and complete for the first time in nearly a decade. Last time I'd walked away broken. This time, I walked away whole.